From your 24-hour news source, this is live coverage of the Cristhian Bahena Rivera murder trial. Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Lunch recess. We're in the presence of the jury. The defendant and attorneys of record are present. Sir, I want to remind you, you're still under oath. Mr. Brown, you may continue with your direct examination.
Thank you. Agent Haran, prior to the lunch break, we were going to discuss two areas of significance that you were able to determine by utilizing the phone records of the number associated with Mollie Tibbetts. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. In general, what two areas were you able to focus local law enforcement on in the search for Mollie Tibbetts?
The area to the north of this map here, which is labeled as box 1, that would be what we considered to be the abduction area, based upon the fact that Mollie's phone was appeared to be on the same route that she had run before, and also appeared to be moving at a pace that would be consistent with a runner. And then also box 2, which is where the phone ended up, from where it was up at box 1 to where it ended up at box 2. That box is considerably larger based upon the per call measurement data that we had.
Sorry, the what measurement?
The per call measurement data. So those were two areas that we directed the law enforcement team to concentrate on for evidence.
And just as you start testifying, we get hammering.
I hear that, yes.
It's okay. We'll break this apart a bit, okay? Make sure everybody understands it. If we could go back to the previous slide, States Exhibit 90. So this area that we see here on Exhibit 90 with the directionality of Mollie Tibbetts' run, is that included in what you have identified in States Exhibit 91 as the abduction area?
Yes.
Okay, so what's the purpose in focusing in on that area? Why would law enforcement need that type of information?
Well, obviously we were trying to determine what happened to Mollie, where she was. If this is where she was confronted by somebody or left this area at a rapid pace, maybe in a vehicle, then it's quite possible that there would be some pieces of evidence perhaps out on that road. Shoes, clothing, a watch, a cell phone, anything like that.
Okay, and then we'll go back to Exhibit 91. Just to be clear, the area that we saw on the previous Exhibit 90, that's the smaller area on the top of this exhibit that represents the area that
That's
we
correct.
just looked at, right?
Yes.
All right. Whenever you say that shortly after 8:28, Mollie Tibbetts' phone headed in a southerly direction, can you be more specific as to what road that it was located on?
Yes, I actually had been out there. I had done some network testing while I was out there, so I got a chance to actually ride on these roads and see where that road that Mollie was on would lead to, and how could you go from that road to this area directly south in the time that it took based upon the data that we had. And essentially where Mollie would normally turn around on her run, that road, there's an intersection there. If you took that road due south, it crosses under the highway, under the interstate. My understanding is that's the only road in the area that does that. Everything else basically dead ends into the interstate.
Okay, let me stop you there for just a second. Let's go back to 90 one more time. All right, so what we're seeing here on Exhibit 90, the road that you're referring to, the intersection that would head the road that heads due south, is it just to the right of the red arrow?
Yes, you can barely see it, but there's basically a white X where the roads are intersecting.
Okay. And then back to 91. That road goes south into this second box 2 area that we see on Exhibit 91. Would that be true?
That's correct.
All right. So at what point on this map or approximate area were you able to make the calculation that Mollie Tibbetts was traveling at almost 70 miles an hour?
The last per call measurement hit up on the road where she was abducted from was at 8:28. The next one after that, I believe, was at 8:35, and it was much farther south on the south side of the tower that services the Brooklyn, Iowa area. Based upon distance, so we have the measurement from one spot to the other, you're basically doing a calculation with time, distance, measurement. You're going to get the overall average speed of whatever she was in.
Okay, which would have been somewhere between 60 and 70 miles per hour.
That's correct.
There were multiple points between that 828 spot that we see in the previous exhibit and this area that's represented as box 2 that you were able to make calculations. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And is it accurate to say that she was traveling somewhere between 60 and 70 miles per hour in that particular area?
My recollection, it was in the low 60 range, and then it actually slowed down. So as the bands started to compress more, the vehicle or the average speed of travel was slowing, and that's consistent with as the per call measurement bands started to come together. It meant that the phone was slowing down as well.
All right. Did you personally go out to the area that's represented here on box 2?
Yes.
You obviously would not have searched this entire area, correct? Yourself?
No.
All right.
No.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's a representation on Exhibit 91 as to what the is it square miles that this area represents?
Yes.
And what is that?
It's 17.4 miles is the area, and then the perimeter is 20.2 miles.
Okay. And
The perimeter is 20.2 miles.
whenever you say the perimeter is 20.2 miles, what are you referring to?
That's the outer edges of the box.
Okay. And the area of the box would be the 17.4 miles.
Right.
How would you characterize this particular area of Poweshiek County near and south of Guernsey?
Like most of the area around Brooklyn, it's almost all cornfields, farmland, very rural, very flat. Although my recollection of the corn at this time of the year it was some of the largest corn I've ever seen in my life,
Okay.
like 10 feet high. It was huge.
Right. And do you remember the road, was it 200th Avenue that you would have traveled south on?
I believe so.
To your knowledge, Agent Haran, did law enforcement investigating this case utilize your information and begin focusing its search on the area that's represented here as box 2?
They did. Initially, when I had gotten there, the focus was more in the town of Brooklyn, in and around Brooklyn. They weren't sure where Mollie had been abducted, if she was abducted. So this really solidified that. We now had a spot where we believe she was taken from, and we also now had a spot where we knew her phone was, which was radically different than being up in the Brooklyn area. So it really did change things for the investigation.
All right. At some point, does Mollie Tibbetts' phone stop transmitting signal?
It does.
What causes that to happen?
There's a number of things, but essentially anything that interrupts your phone's ability to communicate with the network. So you could destroy it, you could power it off, you could pull the battery, or if you're just let's say in a tunnel or in something where you have no more service for the phone.
Okay, if the battery would go dead on the phone, would that stop it from transmitting to any particular tower in the area?
It would, yes.
And all of the information that you've testified here to today, did you provide that to law enforcement in an effort to locate the phone of Mollie Tibbetts?
Yes, it did.
And also to help potentially locate Mollie Tibbetts herself?
Yes.
All right, Agent Haran, that's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
Defense may cross-examine.
Agent Haran. The Fitbit app on an iPhone records data over and above just a running route, correct?
It does, yes.
It can also record things like heart rate.
Yes.
Were you able to retrieve anything relative to heart rate on this Fitbit app?
There were discussions reference a heart rate. I was not part of that, so I don't know what the actual results were. But I know that there was somebody had spoken with someone at Fitbit that had information regarding a heart rate.
And your training and experience tell you that heart rate's relevant because you can kind of tell us time of death, right?
I've worked a case in the past where a Fitbit would absolutely show that when it stops, it coincided when somebody had passed away.
Very well. And your involvement in this case was strictly limited to Mollie Tibbetts' phone, right?
My involvement, yes.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Any redirect?
Other members of your team relieved you here in Powesheik County, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
All right, and how many days were you on the ground in Brooklyn assisting?
About 7 days.
Okay. And then somebody from CAST came in and relieved you?
Yes, we had another agent in my unit respond out here as well.
Okay, that's all.
Anything else?
Your Honor.
Sir, thank you for being here. You're excused.
Thank you.
State may call its next witness.
Our next witness is Dr. Dennis Klein.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. It'll be just a minute for anyone. We won't take a formal break, but if anyone would like to get up and stretch, feel free to do so. You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Okay. Sir, could you head right over there and be seated, please?
Okay.
You can proceed when you're ready, Mr. Brown.
Dr. Klein, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Dennis Klein, K-L-E-I-N.
And how are you employed?
I'm the state medical examiner.
And can you tell the jury just briefly what the duties of the state medical examiner are?
Yes, one of my duties is to administer the state medical examiner's office, which provides oversight and guidance to the county medical examiners. And we also provide autopsy service for about 80% of the state.
What's your educational background?
I graduated Bowdoin College with a Bachelor of Arts degree in chemistry, graduated from the University of Vermont College of Medicine, received the MD degree, and then did a 1 year of internal medicine internship, and then did anatomical and clinical pathology residencies, and then a fellowship in forensic pathology.
Okay. You have in front of you a curriculum vitae, which is, what's that? Which is State's Exhibit 92. It's already been admitted, but what is State's Exhibit 92?
This is my curriculum vitae, or a resume of my educational and occupational background.
Okay. It summarizes your background and history?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Dr. Klein, part of the duties of the medical examiner, maybe one of the chief duties of the medical examiner, is to perform a forensic autopsy. Is that true?
Yes.
Can you please tell the jury, describe for them, and define what is the purpose of a forensic autopsy?
The purpose of a forensic autopsy is to document medical findings, collect evidence, and provide information that determines cause and manner of death for deaths that occur under medical examiner jurisdiction. So any case that would be of interest to the state would be of interest to the medical examiner.
And how many forensic autopsies does your office perform each year?
It's been increasing. Last year we performed 1,200 autopsies.
And are there other forensic pathologists that work in your office
Yes.
that do the same thing you do when it comes to performing a forensic autopsy?
Yes, they do.
How many other forensic pathologists are there?
There are 3 other full-time, and we have 4 part-time forensic pathologists.
Your office is pretty busy. Would that be true?
Yes.
All right. What is the chief goal of any forensic autopsy?
The primary goal is to answer key questions. First of all, identifying who the person is who died, and then determine a cause and manner of death.
And define for the jury what you mean by cause of death.
Cause of death is the etiology, so the medical condition, poisoning, injury, or abnormality that ultimately led to that person's death.
All right. And then can you define for the jury, please, what you mean by manner of death?
Manner of death is a vital statistics determination. All deaths in Iowa are categorized into one of 5 categories, and those categories include natural, accident, suicide, homicide, and undetermined.
Whenever you rule a particular manner of death as a homicide, what do you mean by that?
The definition for homicide for vital statistic purposes and a medical examiner is when death occurs at the hands of another person.
All right, Dr. Klein, excuse me. When did you first become involved in the recovery or autopsy of a person later identified as Mollie Tibbetts?
I was first informed by a telephone call from the county medical examiner, Dr. Paulson in Poweshiek County. And then I actually, my first encounter was on August 21st when I went out to the cornfield, the scene where the body that was ultimately identified as Mollie Tibbetts was found.
So you and a team from your office went to the location where she was located?
That's correct.
All right, and that would have been in a cornfield near the town of Guernsey?
That's correct.
Whenever you arrived at that area, were you shown to the location where the body had been located?
Yes.
And what were your initial observations?
The initial observation was there were human remains in a state of decomposition that were mostly covered by corn stalks.
Okay. To your knowledge, had any of the corn stalks been removed from the body?
Not to my knowledge at that time.
There's commonly you come across a group a crime scene team assigned by the Division of Criminal Investigation.
Yes,
Were any personnel from DCI there that were assigned as crime scene technicians?
yes,
Was that Amy Johnson
yes it
and
was.
Jonna Berry?
Yes.
Did you and your team then recover the remains that were underneath the corn stalks?
Yes.
And how is it that you go about doing that with a body that's in the state of decomposition that we've seen here last week?
Yeah, so we document with photographs in a layer-wise fashion. So we take pictures of with the vegetation, corn stalks on the body. We carefully remove that vegetation, take additional photographs, observe the body, and then using multi-hands with my team, we lift the body up and carefully place it into a body bag. And then we photograph and examine the area where the body was to see if there were any other pieces of evidence or body parts that we would need to recover.
So whenever you lifted the body, later identified as Mollie Tibbetts, up and put her into the body bag, was there anything of significance underneath her that you observed?
The thing that we saw was just the outline of her body, and it was clear that the body had been decomposing in that area for some time.
Okay, nothing else of any significance?
Correct.
All right. Explain, if you would, Dr. Klein, what causes a body to decompose at any certain rate, either faster or slower? Can you help explain that, please?
Yes, so the body decomposes in a couple of different ways. There are parts of the own body that starts to decompose or autolyze, meaning self-digest. And then bacteria and then eventually insects start breaking down the body. All these processes act more quickly the warmer and more humid the environment is. So in a very hot, humid environment such as July in Iowa, that would be a rapid acceleration of decomposition as opposed to in the wintertime in Iowa.
Okay. So whenever you were shown to the location of the body, how would you describe the weather conditions that you were dealing with?
They were hot and humid.
Okay. And when you go into corn, it gets even worse, isn't that right?
That's correct.
Humidity goes up,
Yes.
and the moisture in the field, was it muddy?
Yes, it was.
Had it rained recently or appeared to have rained recently?
Yes, it was very muddy.
Are those all factors that accelerate the decomposition of a body?
Yes.
Where did you take the body that was later identified as Mollie Tibbetts?
So the body was then brought to the state medical examiner's office, which is the state morgue, which is located in Ankeny, Iowa, which is located about 15 minutes north of Des Moines.
One other thing I want to touch base on, we'll get into the autopsy at your office, but does the decomposition process destroy the fingerprints or other identifying characteristics of a body?
It can.
Okay, and what about the blood that's in the body? What happens to blood in the body when it decomposes?
Blood starts to disappear, and even after a few days, sometimes it can be difficult getting any blood. And then by the time that a body is in a moderate to advanced stage of decomposition, there's no blood left for analysis.
Okay, and how would you characterize the state of decomposition for Mollie Tibbetts?
I would categorize her as a moderate to severe decomposition with skeletonization, meaning parts of bone were starting to show through.
Right. And later at autopsy, were you able to recover any blood from her body that was useful to you in your analysis?
No.
Once you got Mollie Tibbetts back to the medical examiner's office, were you able to perform a forensic autopsy?
Yes.
And when did that take place?
So that was the following day on August 22nd.
And tell us where it would have occurred.
It would have been in the morgue in Ankeny, Iowa.
Is this your office,
Yes.
or at least associated with your office, correct?
Yes.
And as part of the autopsy process, did you obtain the assistance of any other persons?
Yes, I had the assistance of technicians who helped me with the examination. And then we also called upon experts from the DCI crime lab to help with specialty items such as trying to obtain fingerprints using specialty techniques, as well as advice on where to collect DNA samples.
Right. And in the fingerprint process, were you able to obtain any usable fingerprints from the body of Mollie Tibbetts?
We tried using a technique called microsil with the assistance, but I wasn't able to obtain any useful fingerprints.
Describe for the jury how you began the autopsy. Well, let me back up. Total time from the time that you began with Mollie Tibbetts at the beginning of the autopsy until you were finished. How long does that process take?
In this particular case, it was done in various stages. So the first stage was about 2.5 to 3 hours. But then because we need to examine the bones and have an expert in bone forensic analysis or an anthropologist, certain steps had to be taken which take days to occur. So there were multiple stages of analysis, but that initial examination was about 3 hours.
And is that pretty standard for any autopsy?
Yes.
So who was the forensic anthropologist that you utilized in this case?
Yes, this was Dr. Heather Garvin.
And is she associated with any university in or around Des Moines?
Yes, with Des Moines University.
Is Dr. Garvin somebody that you've worked with on previous cases?
Yes.
All right, tell the jury how you began the autopsy of Mollie Tibbetts.
So we followed the process of documenting findings, and that includes taking photographs, taking notes, and observing. Once the initial step is done, we take x-rays. The purpose of that is to see if there are any bullets or other retained fragments that might help explain death. Then we remove clothing and observe that clothing, which we did have findings on the clothing that helped further the examination. And then we'll sometimes clean the body in certain areas and observe and try to identify injuries on the external part of the body. So that would be the skin in various areas of the body, looking for injuries and interpreting those findings that would help in determining cause and manner of death.
Right, this is all external, is that correct?
Yes,
Then typically in any autopsy you would perform an internal examination.
that's correct.
Given the state of decomposition of Mollie Tibbetts, were you able to do any type of internal examination?
We certainly did open the skin in a way that we normally would, but due to the extent of the decomposition, most all the organs except for the right kidney were not identifiable and were completely decomposed.
All right, you mentioned that you x-ray the body before, or it's one of the first things that you do, is that correct?
Yes.
Just in summary, what would the x-rays have revealed to you concerning the body of Mollie Tibbetts?
The first thing that we're looking for is bullets or any other type of retained weaponry. So a tip of a knife sometimes can get caught up in a bone. And then we're also looking for any other identifying features. Sometimes people have hip replacements or other orthopedic metal that will help us in identifying someone who's died and is decomposed.
Were you able to observe any anything of significance with regard to the injuries to Mollie Tibbetts from x-rays?
No.
Okay, we'll talk about clothing in here in just a second, but what I want to do, Dr. Klein, is essentially go head to toe with your autopsy findings. Is that acceptable to you?
Yes.
All right, so let's go with the first photo, which has already been admitted. I believe this is 53, is that right? Okay, State's Exhibit 53 is on the screen. What are we looking at here?
So this is before the body is cleaned, and this, you can see that the skin is darkened and leatherized. This is from decomposition. You can see that there's the letter H, and then I've placed in this photo a yellow arrow that indicates a defect in the skin. It has smooth margins. This would be consistent with a sharp force injury or a stab wound of the left cheek.
And the yellow arrow that's pointing, it appears to be a hole just below the left ear. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And just to make sure we're oriented correctly, I've identified the left ear. Is that on the right side of this photo?
That's on the right. The left ear is on the right side of the photo.
Try not to confuse it. I will. And then the top of the head would be to the top of the photo?
That's correct.
Okay. Anything else of significance on Exhibit 53?
No, the only thing, just so that for clarity's sake, in the ear you'll see that hole. Because of the decomposition and drying artifact, that's the ear canal. That's not another wound.
Okay. Other than the wound that we see here in Exhibit 53, were there other identifiable wounds on the head of Mollie Tibbetts?
Not on this photo.
Okay. We're going to move, well, before we move to the next exhibit, were you able to utilize photos that were taken by the forensic anthropologist, Dr., I don't know if we identify her, Dr. Garvin, in assisting you in coming to your conclusions in this case?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 54 and 55. Do you see those pictures?
Yes.
On the left side of the screen is Exhibit number 54. What are we looking at here?
Okay, so as I mentioned before, there's different stages and processes. So this is in the process where all the soft tissue has been removed from the skull. So we're looking at just the bone. And in the photo to the left, which is marked as DSC 1930, this is the right side of the skull, and just above and forward of the ear canal and behind the ear socket is a defect. It's an oblique oblong defect, and a close-up of that defect is seen in the photo just to the right, DSC 2035.
Actually, if you could, for purposes of the record, if you could use the exhibit numbers that are there, is that okay?
I apologize, yes.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So Exhibit 55, this would be the close-up of that defect on the right side of the skull. And the features that are important to notice is that there's a pointy end towards the top and a slightly squared off component on the bottom. This is consistent with a knife that would have a blunt end and a sharp end, or what we call a single-edged blade.
Okay. Can you make any determination whether or not this single-edged blade that caused this wound would have penetrated through the skull?
So not shown in this photograph, but by observing the skull, we see that this wound goes all the way through the skull.
Okay. And is this the skin that we saw that was covering this area in State's Exhibit 53 before it was cleaned up? Is this the same area?
No, this is a different area, opposite
Okay.
side of the skull.
Gotcha. So just to be clear, were there two areas of injury on the skull?
Yes.
All right. One on the left,
Correct.
and then a penetrating wound on the right.
Correct.
Okay, let's go back. I just want to make sure we're clear to the previous picture. This particular exhibit, number 53, do you have any opinion as to what would cause this injury here?
This would have been a sharp force injury, so a knife could have caused this.
And did the knife, would it have penetrated the skull that we see here in Exhibit 53?
No.
Okay, so Left side, it does not penetrate, correct?
Correct.
This would be associated more with her cheek,
Yes.
and the right side is a penetrating sharp force wound through the skull.
That's correct.
All right. Let's go back to the next slide. There we go. 54 and 55. Anything else of any significance that assisted you in arriving at the cause and manner of death in States Exhibit 54 or 55?
No, we've covered it.
All right. Hang on just a second. In examining the body of Mollie Tibbetts at autopsy, moving to the neck area, were you able to observe any injuries to the neck area that were of significance to you?
So during the initial part of the examination, all the soft tissue was absent due to decomposition. It was only after processing the bones and observation by the forensic anthropologist, Dr. Garvin, that additional sharp force defects were identified in the what are called the cervical vertebra, or the bones that stack up on one another, forming the neck bones.
Okay. And let's go to the next slide. So on the screen here, Dr. Klein, are exhibits 56 and 57. Do you see those?
Yes.
Do both of these photos represent the bones in the neck area after they had been cleaned?
That's correct.
All right. Let's go with States Exhibit 56 first. Can you please describe for the jury what we're seeing in this particular photo?
Yes, so you can see that they're labeled C4 and C5. Those stand for cervical vertebra 4 and cervical vertebra 5. The way the vertebra or the neck bones are numbered is 1 is right beneath the skull and actually supports the skull, and it goes all the way to 7, which is right about the area where your collarbones are. So about midway in the neck, this is the exhibit 56 shows the left side of the neck, and you can see that there are defects indicated by the yellow arrow, and both C4 and C5 show this linear mark, which is from a sharp force instrument like a knife. And then in exhibit 57, we see the right side of the neck bones, and you can see that there's a defect indicated by the yellow arrow. One point of note is that a blood vessel called the vertebral artery does travel through.
The blood vessel.
Travels through.
The name of the blood vessel.
Oh, the vertebral artery. The vertebral artery, which is, there's 4 major blood vessels that are in the neck. One of those 4 runs through that opening right next to that yellow arrow in exhibit 57.
Do you have any opinion as to whether or not the wounds that we see here in States Exhibit 56 and 57 would be consistent with any type of slashing or stabbing motion of a knife?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
That they are consistent with a sharp force injury, could be from stabbing or a large slash or incised wound.
Okay. So just to make sure we're oriented correctly with regard to these 2 bones, one is on the left and one is on the right side of the neck, correct?
Correct.
All right. Are there major blood vessels in the neck that would be near where these sharp force injuries are located on the vertebrae C4 and C5?
Yes.
And what are those?
So depending on the angle that the knife entered the neck, there are the jugular vein, the carotid arteries, and then as we discussed in Exhibit 57, the vertebral artery.
With regard to the injuries that we've observed so far in the skull, as well as the 2 injuries that we see here in the vertebrae, is there any way that you can quantify the amount of force that would be necessary to cause the types of injuries that you observed?
I can't give you a metric like foot-pounds, but I can tell you that the order in which the amount of force needed depends on how sharp the blade is and then the tissue that it's going through. So bone offers the most amount of resistance. Cartilage, like the material inside your ear, would offer the next, and then the third would be skin. So if you use general types of common household experiences with trimming any types of meat products, you would understand that it would take a little bit more force than cutting through a steak, but probably not that much more.
All right, anything else of significance that was relevant to your determination as to cause and manner of death with states 56 or 57?
No.
All right, let's move down. You had mentioned before the clothing that was associated with Mollie Tibbetts, is that right?
Yes.
All right, so talk to us a bit about that. Whenever you recovered her body in the cornfield, was there any article of clothing that was still on her?
Yes.
And what was that?
So there was a sports bra that was rolled up and above the normally worn area and up closer to the neck area. And then there was socks and then 2 running shoes.
Okay. Any shorts or underwear?
No.
Any headband or anything of that nature?
No.
Okay. Just lost our photo. Okay, let's move to the next exhibit. On the screen here is exhibit number 58, which has been admitted. What is this?
So this is the sports bra that we removed from the body. This would be the front of the bra, and you can see a yellow arrow pointing to what looks like a white little oblong shaped area. What we've done here is we took a piece of white paper, put it behind the cloth so you can actually see that outline, and this is a sharp force defect. Similar to what we saw in the right side of the skull, you can see that there's a blunted end towards the left of the photograph, and it becomes sharp and pointy as it goes more towards the right side of the photograph.
And what would this particular defect in the front of the sports bra be consistent with?
This would be consistent with a stab wound going through the bra and into the body.
Okay. There does not appear to be a lot of blood on the bra, at least visible to the naked eye. Would you agree?
That's correct.
Do you have an explanation for that?
Some of it may start to decompose, and it's also the color may also be hard. Perhaps with chemical analysis there could be, but it's certainly not visibly present. I agree.
Okay. All right. Any other defects like the one we see here in Exhibit 58 to the front of the sports bra?
Not to the front.
Okay. We'll move to State's Exhibit 59. What are we seeing here in State's Exhibit 59?
So this is the back side of the bra. This would be on the left side and left back side of the bra. And what I've done is I've taken white triangle pieces of paper and placed them on the bra where there are these defects. Again, these are all sharp force defects of the left side and left back side of the bra.
Are these sharp force defects similar to the same defect that you observed on the front side of the sports bra?
Yes.
Right. And do each of these defects that we see here in Exhibit 59, do they penetrate all the way through the fabric?
Yes.
Does there appear to be much blood that's associated with those particular defects?
No.
Same explanation as before?
Yes.
Okay. And how many different ones do we see?
So there were 5 on the left and left back side and 1 on the right front.
Okay. Anything else of significance here in Exhibit 59 that assisted you in the cause of death?
No.
All right, we're going to move to State's Exhibit 60. What is State's Exhibit 60?
So this pelvic area of the body. What you see is a decomposition effect, so the skin is leatherized, yellow, and dark. What are apparent here, you can see small little labels. We do have some subsequent photographs that will look at those closer, but this gives you an idea of the distribution of defects, sharp force defects, stab wounds of both the right chest and abdominal area and left chest and abdominal area.
So I know it's hard to tell, is this the front or back side of Mollie Tibbetts?
This would be the front side.
Okay. And at the top of the photo, would that be her neck area?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, let's look at the next photos that are a little bit closer. States Exhibits 61 and 62 are on the screen. Let's take 61 first. What are we looking at in that area?
So States Exhibit 61, there's a blue arrow which shows a blow-up closer view of the one of the wounds that's indicated by a yellow arrow in States Exhibit 62. The features to focus on here are that the edges are smooth, which are characteristic of a sharp force injury or stab wound. This would have been in the chest area and would have likely gone through the chest and likely injured internal organs.
There is one, oh sure, you bet. The wound that we see in States Exhibit 61, is it a close-up actually of wounds that we see in 62, or are there 3 different wounds?
There's a total of 2 wounds that we see. The wound in Exhibit 61 is a blow-up of that wound at the base of the arrow, of the blue arrow.
Okay. Anything else here of significance in States Exhibit 61 or 62?
No.
Okay. Okay, we'll go ahead and move. States Exhibit 63, 64, and 65 are all on the screen. Do you see that?
Yes.
Are those photos all associated with, in terms of what injuries you observed at autopsy?
Yes.
Okay, can you please just describe what States Exhibit 63?
So in Exhibit 63, you can see that there's labels D, E, and F, and five, again, showing smooth margins, and this wound penetrates through the skin.
Clear for the record. States Exhibit 64, you have your label. Your label.
That's correct.
And both of those photos represent. Okay. Anything else you have on the screen at the moment?
No.
Okay, we'll move to the next. On the screen now are States Exhibit 66, 67, and 68. Do you see those?
Yes.
And these are what part of the body of Mollie Tibbetts?
Right, so the previous series we were looking at the left side of the front of the body. Now we're looking at the right side of the body, and we're looking at what I labeled 3 different stab wounds, A, B, and C. And those are depicted in aggregate in Exhibit 66. And then in Exhibit 67, there's a close-up of A, and again, you can see the smooth edge demonstrating that this is a sharp force or stab wound. And then in Exhibit 68, again, we see smooth edges, and that would be with depicting the stab wound B.
Okay. So just to be clear, State's Exhibit 66 that's on the left side of the screen has 3 white labels.
Correct.
All of those are separate stab wounds?
Yes.
Okay, and then the close-ups that we have on it, like on Exhibit 67 is A.
Correct.
All right, and then 68 is your B, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Would those wounds have been caused, like the other wounds, by some type of knife or other sharp force object?
Yes.
Okay. And do they penetrate all the way through the skin into the body cavity?
Yes.
So, Dr. Klein, we've looked at a constellation of injuries with regard to Mollie Tibbetts, and the constellation of injuries I'm referring to is on her chest. You would agree?
Yes.
Would vital organs have been affected by the object that would have caused the wounds that we've seen in these photos on the screen, 66 through 68 in the previous photos?
Yes.
Can you describe that for us, please?
The area in the body would be consistent with the chest and upper abdomen, and those areas contain vital organs, including the lungs.
And the heart?
Could be, yes.
Okay. Anything else of significance on 66, 67, or 68 that assisted you in forming your opinions?
No.
All right, we'll move to the next set of photos. On the screen now is Exhibit 69, 70, and 71. Do you see that?
Yes.
These photos were actually taken after the assistance with Dr. Garvin, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Were they of assistance to you, though, in determining your cause and manner of death?
Yes.
Let's take 69 first. It's on the top left of the screen. Do you see that?
Yes.
Tell the jury what we're looking at in Exhibit 69.
So you can see the label R6. This stands for right sixth ribs. So each of the ribs are named by a number, starting with 1 near the collarbone all the way down to the lower portion of the chest. And then they're just given left and right designations. So right sixth rib would be about halfway between the collarbone and the bottom of your rib cage. On the top of that rib, about mid-portion on the front, slightly side area of the rib, on the top of that rib were defects that you can see in Exhibit 70, and this is just a close-up view. And you can see there's little cut marks, or sometimes they'll refer to as kerfs, that this would be consistent with a sharp instrument that's inserted through the soft tissue, the skin and the soft tissue of the chest, going in between the ribs, and the sharp portion is cutting on the top of the sixth rib.
Okay. On State's Exhibit 70, we see 2 marks in the middle, or just above the middle of the photo. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does that represent 2 separate stab wounds, or could that be caused from one insertion of the sharp force, like a knife?
Right. So technically there are 2 defects. The most likely is that the one stab wound into the chest, and then a person moves, or the knife is moved between when it's inserted and removed, is the most likely explanation.
And then Exhibit 71 shows the same area, just a bit closer.
This would be of the left rib.
I'm sorry.
So same scenario. This is the top of the left rib. So instead of having those defined kerf marks, you can see it's almost like a scrape along the surface of the rib. And this would also be in an area consistent with some of the stab wounds that we had previously described on the left side of of the torso.
Okay. These would be associated, at least in general, in the general area where we would have seen the same sharp force defects on the jogging bra.
Yes.
Anything else of significance on 69, 70, or 71?
No.
All right, we'll move to the next set of pictures. States Exhibit 72 and 73 are on the screen. Can you please describe for us what is Exhibit 72?
Yes, so States Exhibit 72 shows a close-up view of the left rib. And so this would be the outside of the rib, so not the part of the rib that's against the lung, but closer to the outside chest wall. And I've put a yellow triangle indicating where the defect is. And so this is likely caused by the tip of a knife or sharp instrument hitting that outside part of the rib, and then the knife tip scrapes along as it moves from that most tip to the tip, which is to the most left part of the photograph, and as it moves towards the right and then slightly downward.
Okay. So would it, in maybe simple terms, would it be the knife striking the bone directly?
That's correct, because the rib is going to provide a significant amount of resistance compared to the soft tissue. So the tip of the knife is going to be stopped by the rib, and then movement either of the knife or the person moving, that tip is going to slide along the surface of the rib.
Okay. And then States Exhibit 73 is, what do we see here?
So this is, so we've talked about the 6th, 7th, and now this is the 8th rib. So this is the most further down rib on the left side. And you can see that there are, again, these defects that are consistent with sharp force defects. This would be on the top left 8th rib. So a knife would be going between the ribs through the muscles and connective tissue, and then the sharp portion of that knife is cutting on the top portion of the rib.
And the injuries that we see in 72 and 73 are separate injuries. Would that be true?
Correct. 2 different ribs, 2 different wounds.
Right, before we move on to the next photo, Dr. Klein, have we covered completely the injuries that you would have observed to the torso of Mollie Tibbetts?
Yes.
All right. Did you also perform any type of examination of her hands looking for injuries?
Yes.
And were you able to find anything of any significance?
Yes.
Okay, we'll move to States Exhibit 74. What is States Exhibit 74? What is this a photo of?
So this is the back of the right hand. There's a large defect from the knuckles over the major portion of the back of the hand. In Exhibit 74, where you see the yellow arrow, there is a defect that, in contrast to the irregular, jagged component of the rest of the defects, which are from decomposition, there could have been injury, I can't tell, but there is this injury at the base of the thumb near the wrist, indicated by the yellow arrow that has that smooth margins, and this is suggestive of another sharp force injury, an incised or cut wound on the back of the hand.
All right, and in the process of your autopsy of Mollie Tibbetts, were you, you may have already described this, but were you able to find any other similar type of wounds to the hand?
This was the only one.
Okay. And does the decomposition process affects that? Would that be true?
Yes.
Concerning the injuries to Mollie Tibbetts, were there any other injuries that we haven't discussed that you observed on her body?
No, this includes everything.
All right. I want to talk about one other thing. The lower abdomen and genitalia of Mollie Tibbetts, how would you characterize the state of decomposition of that part of her body?
Severe.
All right. Did you make any attempts to take swabs from that area of the body?
Yes.
Were you successful?
Not of the pelvic region itself, but as close as we could. So along the inner thighs, there was some remnant skin that we did swab.
And that would have been submitted to the DCI laboratory for analysis?
Yes.
Right. But there was nothing that you could take swabs from or samples from related to the genitalia of Mollie Tibbetts?
That's correct.
It was essentially gone.
Correct.
All right. Any other bodily fluid that you were able to take for later toxicology testing?
There was no liquids. We had to rely on skeletal muscle for analysis.
And did you submit that for a toxicology analysis?
Yes.
Anything of significance to cause and manner of death that came back on toxicology?
The toxicology report was negative.
Right, and just, you and I know what we're talking about, but can you just describe what that is whenever we talk about a toxicology of any particular person?
So as part of a standard forensic autopsy, toxicology testing, typically that's done on blood, and there's a panel of various drugs that are tested for, and there's a certain cutoff value that the lab is able to determine whether a person may have been affected by those drugs or not. If there's no blood, you can rely on other solid organ samples. The only organ we really had left was actually not an organ, but the muscle, the skeletal muscle. So if there were significant amounts of various drugs or alcohol, that would appear in this toxicology testing. It was negative.
So all negative for alcohol or drugs?
Correct.
Based upon your training and experience, the results of your autopsy, do you have an opinion as to the cause of death of Mollie Tibbetts?
Yes.
And what is that?
Multiple sharp force injuries.
And based upon your training and experience and the results of your autopsy, do you have an opinion as to the manner of death of Mollie Tibbetts?
Yes.
What is that?
Homicide.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Defense may cross-examine.
Dr. Klein, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Klein, in the course of your forensic autopsy of Mollie Tibbetts, did you take her fingernails?
Yes.
Why?
That's part of our standard protocol for any suspected homicide case.
And why is that part of your protocol?
Sometimes the crime laboratory can do analysis on those fingernails looking for assailant DNA.
Sure. And especially in this case, I think we saw the photo of Ms. Tibbetts' hand. There was an injury to the back of the hand, which would indicate that perhaps a defensive wound was found, right?
Correct.
So that makes the fingernails doubly important, correct?
It would be important, yes.
Ms. Tibbetts was said to be about 5'2" or 5'3". Was that consistent with your findings?
Yes.
Now, the weapon that was used to cause Ms. Tibbetts' death, could you tell if it was the same weapon throughout, or could there be multiple weapons?
All the weapons are consistent with one another, and they would all be consistent with the same weapon, but I'm not able to exclude more than one weapon.
Okay. And the wounds that you saw to Ms. Tibbetts' body, first of all, based upon the wound that penetrated the skull, that's going to take a fairly significant knife, isn't it?
Yes, it would take a knife that was strong enough to go through bone, which would offer the most resistance of anywhere in the body.
Okay. And are you able to give an opinion as to how much force it takes to penetrate a skull?
I don't have an exact, any type of metric, whether that be foot-pounds. I think we would have to rely on our general common knowledge with cooking and those types of things. Obviously, the sharper the tip of the blade, the easier and less force would be needed.
The wounds to Ms. Tibbetts' head, we had wounds on both sides of the head, correct?
Yes.
Could you tell the vantage point of the assailant from where the wounds were located?
No.
So you couldn't tell if the assailant was standing in front of or behind Ms. Tibbetts?
That's correct.
You couldn't tell if the assailant was standing over Ms. Tibbetts?
Correct.
The wound to the skull, the one that penetrated the skull, was that wound in and of itself fatal?
It could have been, yes.
The wounds to the vertebrae, C4 and C5, we had one on the left and one on the right, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell from those wounds the vantage point of the assailant?
No.
Again, can't tell if in front of or behind.
Correct.
Can you tell from any of these wounds if Ms. Tibbetts was standing in front of or behind the assailant? Strike that. In front of or with her back turned to the assailant?
I would not be able to tell that, no.
Okay. How many total knife wounds did you see? Did you calculate?
Yes, so my calculation is 9 definitive wounds. I suspect up to 12.
And some of these are in the back of the body?
The back of the body was decomposed, so what we're looking at is from about the armpit side area forward.
And that's what's depicted in the photograph of the sports bra?
Correct.
Can you tell anything from these wounds, the size of the assailant?
No.
Did this appear to be, in your training and experience, a fairly frenzied attack?
I can't tell you the order or rapidity with which the wounds all occurred, just the locations and the total numbers.
The injuries to the neck, you talked about the carotid artery, the jugular vein, and the other artery, which I'm not going to try to pronounce. Those all, if they're severed, cause significant blood loss, don't they?
Yes.
And you expect to find significant blood in a location other than a cornfield if that blood was, let's say, in the trunk of a car.
Correct.
Dr. Klein, thank you.
Thank you.
Nothing further.
Any redirect? Go ahead,
Yes,
Mr.
it's
Brown.
it's very short, Judge. The fingernails that were collected, those were submitted to the DCI lab, is that correct?
Yes.
For purposes of DNA comparison?
Yes.
I think I did forget to ask you about that, but would any of the skin cells, if there were any underneath the fingernails, would those be affected by the same decomposition process that you described earlier?
Yes.
And the constellation of wounds that we observed in the photos, what was the estimation of the number again?
Right, so 9 definitive, and I suspect up to 12.
Okay. So if you're suspecting 4 additional stab type wounds, what is it that affects your opinion as to whether or not you can say those are definitive stab wounds?
In the wounds that I said were definitive, I had at least 2 points of reference. They would be either corroborated by defects to the bone or defects to clothing. There were some wounds that I had neither of those, just a soft tissue injury, and due to decomposition, I felt that it was highly suspicious for sharp force injury, but was not 100%.
And lastly, Dr. Klein, you were asked concerning how much bleeding would be associated with the wounds that you observed. You remember that?
Yes.
All right. There would be a significant amount of bleeding. Would that be true?
Yes.
If that bleeding occurred outside of a vehicle and it ended up on the ground, would it be readily recognizable on the ground weeks later?
I think after rain and decomposition, it could be not visibly apparent to the eye.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Freeze, anything else of this witness?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You're excused.
Thank you.
Members of the jury, we'll take a 10-minute recess at this time. I want to remind you of your admonition. Please leave your notebooks where they are. The hall's been cleared, so you may leave when you're ready.
From your 24-hour news source, this is live coverage of the Cristhian Bahena Rivera murder trial. Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Seated, please.
Watch your step. Ready? Okay. Dr. Garvin, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your name for the record?
It's Heather Garvin.
And how are you employed?
I am an associate professor of anatomy at Des Moines University, and through the university, I also have a contract with the state of Iowa as a forensic anthropology consultant, given that I'm a board certified forensic anthropologist.
We're just going to request you speak a little bit slower.
No problem.
So how long have you been employed as a forensic anthropologist?
So I started casework in 2005 as a graduate student at Mercyhurst College and been involved with it ever since. Slower still?
No.
Sorry.
Okay.
As of 2017 is when I became board certified as a forensic anthropologist.
Can you please just briefly outline your basic educational training?
So I have undergraduate degrees in anthropology and zoology from the University of Florida. I have a master's degree in biological and forensic anthropology from Mercyhurst College. And I have a PhD in functional anatomy and evolution from Johns Hopkins University, and then board certified through the American Board of Forensic Anthropology.
Okay. And your teaching duties, where are they at?
At Des Moines University, I teach anatomy.
Okay. And how long have you been teaching at Des Moines University?
Since July of 2017.
I'm going to show you what's already been admitted as State's Exhibit 93, if I may approach.
You may go ahead.
Dr. Garvin, we've already admitted State's Exhibit 93, but can you please tell us what State's Exhibit 93 is?
This is my CV.
Okay, and what does it summarize?
It summarizes my education, my publications, my grants, pretty much my academic career.
Okay. All right, thank you. You can just set that up there. You indicated that you were board certified as a forensic anthropologist.
That is correct.
What does that entail exactly to become board certified?
So the only certifying body in the U.S. is the American Board of Forensic Anthropology. You have to obtain a PhD in anthropology or a related field. And then when I became board certified, you had to wait 3 years post-PhD to apply to sit for the board exam. That application to sit for the board exam, you had to submit letters of recommendation, training logs, and examples of case reports for them to review. If they determined that you were eligible to sit for the board exam, there is a practical exam and a written multiple choice exam that you must pass with 80% or above to become board certified.
Okay, you went through that entire process to become board certified as a forensic anthropologist, is that correct?
Correct.
Right. How many other forensic anthropologists are in the United States?
There's a little over 100, maybe about 102 active board certified forensic anthropologists in the U.S.
So that type of specialty in comparison to other specialties is fairly rare?
Correct.
All right. What types of things can a forensic anthropologist assist with whenever a body is located and there are determinations that need to be made about what happened?
So forensic anthropologists are experts in skeletal anatomy. So what we do is we typically look at the bones, we're going to assess them, inventory them, and then reveal to the medical examiner any kind of evidence we can, either about the identity of the individual, if it's an unknown decedent, or the circumstances around their death.
Have you consulted with the Iowa State Medical Examiner's Office in your capacity as a forensic anthropologist?
I have.
And do you know approximately how many occasions you've been requested to assist?
It's not specific to the Iowa State Medical Examiners, but since I've moved to Iowa, I've had 127 cases.
Okay. And did you do this type of work, forensic anthropology, prior to moving to the state of Iowa?
Yes, from 2012 to 2017, I was an assistant professor in the Applied Forensic Sciences Department at Mercyhurst University, where I supervised forensic anthropology casework and trained undergraduates and graduate students in forensic anthropology.
Okay. And where is Mercyhurst?
Erie, Pennsylvania.
And can you, maybe you've already provided some explanation here, but what exactly is forensic anthropology and how does it assist in arriving at a cause and manner of death for any particular person?
So by definition, forensic anthropology is the application of biological anthropology to medical legal scenarios. So forensic anthropologists apply specialized knowledge about human skeletal anatomy to provide information to the medical examiner or the coroner, either about the identity or their circumstances around the death. Forensic anthropologists themselves do not determine cause or manner of death, but we're providing more evidence to the medical examiner to help them in their determination.
Okay. Are you familiar with Dr. Dennis Klein?
I am.
And are you familiar with his staff at the Iowa State Medical Examiner's Office?
I am.
Have you worked with each of them, all four of them, on cases over the years?
Since July 2017.
All right. So only, I shall say over the years, I make it sound longer, but it's actually about the last 3 to 3.5 years. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, Dr. Garvin, were you asked to assist in examining the body of Mollie Tibbetts?
I was.
When were you called in to help review on this case?
So I received a call from Dr. Klein on August 21st about the case, asking me to be there the following morning, August 22nd, for the beginning of the autopsy.
Okay. And what was your role, similar to what you've already described generally in this case as it has been in other cases?
Yes.
Okay. And were you present for the autopsy of Mollie Tibbetts?
I was present for a small portion of it at the beginning just to see the condition of the remains and also to create a plan with Dr. Klein about my subsequent analyses.
And is there anything that has to be done to prepare the bones that are recovered from any particular person that has been autopsied?
Yes, so as a forensic anthropologist, I'm interested in the bones themselves, not the soft tissue. So after the medical examiner has completed their analyses of the soft tissue, we essentially place them in a heated water bath to remove the remaining soft tissue so that I can get a better view of the bones.
Okay.
It's called maceration.
Okay. And was that done in this case?
It was.
Is that a process that you do yourself?
I do not. The medical examiner's office does it for me.
Okay. And at some point, the bones of Mollie Tibbetts were prepared for your examination?
That is correct.
And where did you go to perform that exam?
So the following day, August 23rd, is when I initially started my examination of the remains, and all of it was done at the state medical examiner's office.
Okay. The entirety of your examination takes how long?
It depends on the case. I would say I spent at least 20 hours looking at the remains, and my reports are pretty extensive. I would say at least 10 to 20 hours writing and preparing the report.
And if you find anything of any significance, do you photograph that for purposes to be used later?
That is correct.
All right. All right, I'm going to show you what's I'm going to show you what's been previously introduced as State's Exhibit 75. It'll be on the screen right in front of you, hopefully. Okay. I will tell you that this photo was a bit tough to get on a screen. That's why it's all the way over to the left. But Exhibit 75 that you have there in front of you, what are we seeing here in 75? In 75.
This is a photograph that was included in my forensic anthropology report, and what it's displaying is all of the skeletal remains, the bones, after processing, after the soft tissue has been removed, and it's in approximate anatomical position. So it's just displaying everything that I had to work with and to analyze.
Okay. In assessing the skeletal remains now of Mollie Tibbetts, was there any particular bone or structure that was missing?
I had a mostly complete skeleton. I believe I was missing one tooth, a hyoid bone, a very small bone that's in the neck, and 2 toe bones, but otherwise I had everything else.
Okay, and what's the explanation, if you have one, for why why the hyoid and the other bones would have been missing?
They probably were not recovered at the scene. They're very small. When bodies are exposed to the elements, you can get animals. There's lots of different environmental influences that can scatter remains.
All right, we'll run through your findings. We'll start with the head, okay? The next picture that we have is State's Exhibit 76. This is a similar picture that we've seen before that was utilized by Dr. Klein, but in State's Exhibit 76, what were you able to find?
So this is a photograph I took of the right side of the head, the cranium, and the arrow there is indicating a sharp force defect that I found on the skull. It's just in front and above the opening for the right ear.
And does this particular area that you have identified with the area, does it penetrate all the way through the skull?
Yes, it perforates through the skull, and after autopsy they did cut open the skull to look at the endocranial surfaces as well, and you could see that opening on the inside.
Okay, we'll look at the next exhibit, State's Exhibit 77. What does this represent?
So this is a close-up image of that defect on the right side of the head. It's in the same orientation. It's just closer to show the borders of that sharp force defect.
Okay. And what, as a forensic anthropologist, what did the borders of that defect tell you about the instrument that was used to inflict it?
So the very sharp borders to it are consistent with sharp force defect or sharp force trauma, something that was created with a beveled surface or a pointed surface where it cut through the bone. The particular triangular shape of this, where down towards the right side there's a more squared edge and a more pointed edge towards the other, suggests that it was likely a single edged blade, where the spine, the non-cutting edge would be the squared part, and then the beveled cutting edge would be towards the point.
And the beveled cutting edge would be a little bit higher up in this photo, is that correct?
Correct, up and towards the left.
Okay. And whenever you looked at the interior of the skull, does this particular wound penetrate all the way through the bone?
Yes.
Can you tell, as a forensic anthropologist, how deep a knife would have been stabbed into this area of the skull?
No, I could not. I mean, it went through the few millimeters of bone that you have that's covering the brain there. I did not have any indication that it hit any other surfaces within the inside of the skull.
Okay. And at the time that you were able to observe the body of Mollie Tibbetts, before this process was done with the bones, what was the state of decomposition that you observed?
It was highly decomposed, mostly mummified tissue, some putrefied tissue underneath that mummification.
Okay, whenever you talk about mummification, what are you referring to?
It's the drying out of the tissues. I don't want to give another example, but the tissues dry out, they become hard, they're dehydrated.
All right. We'll move on to State's Exhibit number 78. This is a bit of a different picture we saw than whenever Dr. Klein testified. You've placed some arrows on State's Exhibit 78. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right, let's start on the left side of the photo. What do the arrows represent on the left side of the photo?
So overall in the photo, we have the two neck vertebrae, C4 and C5, sitting on top of one another, as they do in the neck, and we're looking at the anterior, the frontal surface of that. Anatomically, there may have been a little bit more space between them because cartilage would sit between those bones. So the yellow and the orange and peach arrows over there are the right side of those neck vertebrae, and each arrow indicates a sharp force defect that I saw in the bone.
I'm sorry, just to make sure we're oriented correctly, the way that the bones are facing us here in State's Exhibit 78, it would be as if we're facing her face, Mollie's face. Would that be true?
True.
Okay, not her, the back of her neck.
Correct.
All right. And the 3 arrows that you're referring to, are those all separate defects to the bone?
So those 4 arrows are all separate defects to the bone, but they all align anatomically with one another and could have been created with a single impact.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. So this could be consistent with a single impact of a sharp force blade.
Correct.
All right. Is it also consistent with multiple stab wounds to the neck?
All I can say is a minimum of 1.
Okay. Then on the right side, there's a blue arrow on State's Exhibit 78. Do you see that?
I do.
And what does that area represent?
So that's a sharp force defect that I have to the left side of the vertebrae there. And in another view, there's a second one on the C4, the top vertebrae right there, that will align with it as well.
Okay. Do the wounds that you see associated with the blue arrow on the right and the other colored arrows on the left, could those have been caused by one blow or one stab of the knife?
No, they don't go all the way through the vertebrae.
So there's at least 2 injuries that we see here then in State's Exhibit 78. Is that true?
Correct. A minimum of 1 to the right and the minimum of 1 to the left side of the neck.
All right. Can you tell by looking at the injuries here to the bones whether or not it was a slashing type motion that would have caused these injuries or some other type of motion that would have caused them?
Well, on the ones to the right, if you look at how far in, how deep in they would go into the bone, it's about 2.5 centimeters. So in my opinion, that wouldn't be consistent with a shallow slashing.
Okay. And then the arrow on that represents the injury on the right, we're saying right side of the picture, that's the left side of the neck, correct?
Correct.
Would that be consistent with the same type of motion that you just indicated?
That one's very shallow. It could be caused either way, either by a perpendicular impact of the blade or a side impact of the blade.
Okay. We'll move on to State's Exhibit 79. What is State's Exhibit 79?
So in this picture here, that top vertebra, that C4, I've taken it and just flipped it over to better show those defects because they're hard to illustrate in the photographs. So the same color arrows correspond to the previous picture. So the yellow and orange is the right side, the green is the left side, and the arrows indicate sharp force defects that I have on that vertebra.
Okay, so the orange and yellow arrows are the right side of the neck, correct?
Correct.
And the green is the left side of the neck.
Correct.
Same injuries that we saw before in State's Exhibit 78, just to make sure we're clear.
The green is one that you couldn't see in the previous photo, but it aligns with that blue arrow, the defect we saw on the bottom vertebra, the C5 vertebra in that previous photo.
Anything else of significance with Exhibit 79 that we haven't already discussed?
No.
All right, we'll move on to the next photo, Exhibit number 80. Again, what are we looking at here with Exhibit 80?
So these are the sharp force defects to the left side of the vertebrae there, same colored arrows as in the previous photographs. So I have that C4 and C5 vertebra sitting against one another, and you can see the linear defects line up with one another.
The linear defects you're referring to are the ones that are represented by the blue arrow and the green arrow?
Correct.
Right. And is this a separate injury than what we've seen before in previous photos?
No, it's just a different view showing that they align with one another.
Anything else of significance here to Exhibit 80?
No.
All right, we'll move on to Exhibit 81. All right, so before we get into Exhibit 81, did you do some examination with regard to the ribs, to the rib bones of Mollie Tibbetts?
So I examined all of the bones of Mollie Tibbetts, all of the surfaces, both with my eyes and under a stereoscopic microscope. Yes, that did include the ribs.
Okay, and what is Exhibit 81 is a cluster of 5 separate photos, would you agree with me?
Correct.
And what do those 5 separate photos that make up Exhibit 81 represent?
So this is another figure from my report that I gave to the medical examiner, and they're showing different views of the defects that I had on the right 6th rib, sharp force defects.
Okay. So do each of the photos, we'll start with the top left corner. First of all, what is that?
So the top left corner, the one labeled A, is the right 6th rib, so that you can see the entire rib there. In the green arrow, it's hard to see right there, but those green arrows are where I have the sharp force defects on the rib. It's kind of anterior lateral for the right 6th rib. And then the remaining photographs are just closer views and different angles and different lighting of those defects on the rib.
Okay. Moving to the right, we have a closer photo of what those defects are, is that right?
That is correct, and you can see that the defects come down to a point. They're V-shaped at the floor, which is consistent with a knife.
Okay. And I see 3 different areas of defect in the bone in the picture on the top right. Would you agree?
Correct. In that one, you can see the 3 deeper ones. There are more shallow ones that are better represented in the other photos.
Okay. And moving down to the next photo, is that one of those photos you're referring to that is in the middle on the left?
Correct. In B there, it's a top-down view. So you can see the 3 deeper sharp force defects, but you can also see just beyond them a couple shallow linear defects as well.
Okay. And then moving below that photo, there's a multiple arrows that show an area on the same rib bone. Was that true?
That is correct. The
Yeah, I'm sorry. What do those represent?
Those are even more superficial linear scratches in the bone. I was going to mention that the green arrow in each of these figures is the same defect for orientation.
Okay. And then moving to the last photo in Exhibit 81, the last part of it, does that show the same area that we're looking at in the previous photographs?
Yes, it does.
All right, looking at those pictures in the 6th rib, what side of the body again was this from?
This is the right.
The right side. Can you tell how many different times a knife would have been stabbed into Mollie that would have caused the injuries that we see here?
Given the close proximity of all of these defects, I said that it is a minimum of 1 impact to that right 6th rib area.
Could it be more than 1?
It's a minimum of 1.
Okay. All right. Anything else of significance with State's Exhibit 81?
No.
All right. State's Exhibit 82. This is the same. Is this the same left? Oh, I'm sorry. This is a different rib. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. My bad. Which rib are we dealing, or are we looking at here in State's Exhibit number 82?
So now we've moved to the left 6th rib.
Okay. This is directly across from the other rib that we were looking at. Would that be accurate?
The rib lies directly across from it, yes.
Okay. This is a constellation of 4 different photos, A, B, C, and D. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's within State's Exhibit 82?
Correct.
All right. On the top left quadrant, what does that photo show?
So that top left quadrant A is an overview of that entire rib. And again, I've demarcated with arrows where the sharp force defects are on that rib. They're a little bit more lateral. On the right side, it was anterior lateral. On the left side, a little bit more lateral on the side.
Okay. Moving to the right of that photo, what do we see in that picture?
So this is a closer view of those sharp force defects. Again, throughout all of these pictures, the green arrow indicates the same defect, the yellow arrow, the same defect for orientation. It's in the orientation that the blade impacted the rib. For example, if you had a more side orientation, it could shave off that top part of the bone versus creating that V-shaped defect that we saw in some of the other linear ones.
Okay. Anything of impact, would you agree?
Yeah, so this is still a sharp force defect. Here it is on the external surface, the outer surface of the rib, where the other views were on the top part of the rib. And it's just a linear notch, a perpendicular impact, and then a trailing scratch from that.
Okay. What would that be consistent with as far as any type of weapon that would have been used to inflict this type of injury we see in Exhibit 83?
Any kind of knife or blade.
It appears to me that in the two photos to the right side of State's Exhibit 83 that the bone appears cracked. Would that be true? There appear to be cracks in the bone?
I'm not sure where you're referring to.
Okay, well, the close picture that we have here on the bottom right, there appears to be some sort of linear mark that cuts across the bone. Do you see that?
The oblique one
Yes.
running down, that's a trailing scratch from the sharp force defect. So the sharp implement created a scratch against that surface.
So the photo that's on the bottom right corner of this State's Exhibit 83, we see what appears to be more of a reddish area in two different parts. Would you agree?
I'm not following.
Yep, that's okay. I may approach. You may. All right. I'll just point it out. This area here that I see on the bottom right photo, and this area here. Do those represent anything that that is connected to any type of sharp force injury?
Well, they're incised bone, they're cut bone along that linear length. They don't tell me anything specific about the implement, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. And then there's appears to be some sort of a cracking or mark on the bone here in the bottom right photo. Would you agree?
So that's all a linear cut. Connecting those two areas that you pointed out, that's a single linear defect in the bone.
So from this point down to this point is one, or this point is
Yes.
one linear defect, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else of significance with regard to State's Exhibit 83?
No.
State's Exhibit 84. There are 4 photos that make up State's Exhibit 84. Would you agree?
I agree.
All right, on the top left corner of this exhibit, what is that?
So that's an overall view of the left eighth rib.
Okay, and then the middle photo on the top is, what does that represent?
So the middle photo and all the others other than A there in the top left corner are close-ups of the defects that is located at that spot of the yellow arrow in A.
Okay, and then describe for us what the defects are in the bone that is here, that is the left eighth rib.
So again, we have defects consistent with sharp force trauma. In this case, it's almost as if some of the bone has been cut away or carved out from that impact.
And again, can you tell us with regard to this area of the eighth rib, how many different stabs of a sharp force or of a knife would have caused this type of injury?
This is a minimum of 1 impact to that left eighth rib.
Same as the others that you've seen?
Correct.
It's 1, could be more?
Correct.
Okay. Anything else here of a significance with State's Exhibit 84?
No.
And then lastly, Dr. Garvin, State's Exhibit 85 is on the screen, is that correct?
That is correct.
We've looked very closely at some of the injuries, or all the injuries that you observed to the skeletal remains of Mollie Tibbetts. Is that true?
That is true.
What does Exhibit 85 then represent?
So this summarizes the various areas that I found those sharp force defects. Overall, I had a minimum of 7 impacts. 1 to that right side of the head, 1 to the right side of the neck, the C4, C5 vertebra, 1 to the left side of the C4, C5 vertebra. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Well, you would describe again, if you would, the injuries that you observed to the neck. The interpreter has to get it. Just
Sorry.
That's fine. Just summarize it for us one more time.
Okay, so besides the 1 to the head, on the right side of the neck at the C4 and the C5 vertebra, I have a minimum of 1 impact. I have a separate impact to the left side of the C4 and C5 vertebra in the neck. I have a sharp force impact to the right 6th rib, another impact to the left 6th rib, another one to the left 7th rib, and another one to the left 8th rib. So in total, a minimum of 7 impacts.
Okay. Did you examine any clothing that Mollie Tibbetts would have been wearing that would have corresponded to those types of injuries that you reviewed, or is that better left to Dr. Klein?
I did not. I'm only interested in the bones.
Okay. Have we fairly summarized all the injuries that you were able to observe in your examination of the skeletal remains of Mollie Tibbetts?
Yes.
All right. Anything else with regard to injuries to her pelvic region, her leg, or thigh bone, shin bones, in feet, anything else that you noticed or observed in your examination of her skeletal remains?
No, the only trauma I saw were the sharp force defects that we've discussed here.
Okay. And as far as cause and manner of death, that also is a medical examiner's area of expertise. Would that be true?
Correct. I can't speak to that.
All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Defense may cross-examine.
No questions.
Okay. Ma'am, thank you for being here. You're excused.
Thank you.
State of Iowa may call its next witness.
Your Honor, on behalf of the state of Iowa rests.
Okay, record should reflect the state of Iowa rests. Counsel, could I get you to approach, please? Members of the jury, with the state resting, we will be in recess until tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Before I send you on your way for the day, I want to remind you of your admonition. Please do not be discussing the case with anyone. That needs to wait until your deliberations. Make sure you're not doing any type of independent research involving the case, and make sure you're not having any media exposure. Please leave your notebooks on your chairs, and our court attendant, Carrie, will hold them, collect them and hold them for the evening. And again, back here at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you.
I would say Cristhian Rivera cleared Ron Pexa.